Hello, my name is Oshling. I came home one rainy evening, unannounced, just to find my mother locked outside, soaked to the bone, shaking on the porch, while my husband was upstairs, warm, laughing in bed with another woman. But that wasn't even the worst part. They told everyone my mother was losing her mind, said I was too emotional to make decisions. Behind closed doors, they were forging signatures, planning to sell her house, isolating us bit by bit, until we were just shadows in our own home. What kind of people do that to family? And what would you do if you found out they weren't just lying to you, but building your downfall, one fake smile at a time? I didn't plan to come home early that day. In fact, I had every intention of staying until after the clinic closed, but something gnawed at me, something more than a passing worry. Maybe it was the way Ronan had replied to my text the night before. Short, cold, no punctuation, like I was just another reminder in his day. Or maybe it was the way my mother's voice trembled when she asked if I'd be back before the weekend. She rarely asked questions like that. She always said, "No rush, honey. I've got the house under control." But not that time. I left work just after 4, telling Teresa at reception that I had a headache. It wasn't a lie. My head had been throbbing since lunch, though it had less to do with my sinuses and more to do with this strange, aching sense that something was off. By the time I pulled off the highway and onto the familiar 2-lane road leading to our house on the edge of Eugene, the clouds had thickened. Oregon rain wasn't new to me, but this kind of rain, the kind that starts as a whisper and swells into something heavier, angrier, always felt like a warning. The windshield wipers clicked back and forth as I turned into the driveway. Ronan's truck was parked inside the garage. That didn't surprise me. He worked from home now, or so he said, but the porch light was off. The kitchen blinds were closed, and then I saw her, my mother, curled up like a child on the far corner of the porch, her hands clutching the edge of a soaked blanket. Her hair was flat against her scalp, rainwater dripping down her temples. Her slippers were dark with moisture. She looked forgotten. I slammed the car door and rushed to her, slipping once on the wet concrete. "Mom! Mom! What are you doing out here?" I dropped to my knees, pulling her into my coat. Her lips trembled. I didn't want to knock too hard. I thought you told them I'd be okay." The breath left my chest like I'd been hit. I helped her up, my hands shaking. She leaned on me, cold as stone, as we approached the front door. I twisted the handle. Locked. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. No footsteps, no voices. I pulled my keys from my purse, inserted one into the lock, and paused. It resisted for a second. This wasn't the old lock. This was new, recently changed. But I got it open. The warmth inside hit me like a betrayal. The house was toasty, too warm for fall. I guided Mom to the living room and wrapped her in a fresh blanket from the couch. I helped her out of her wet slippers and sat beside her. She stared blankly at the muted television screen, her lips still trembling. I looked around. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and cedar, our signature plug-in scent. The fireplace upstairs crackled gently. There were faint thuds above. Laughter. I rose slowly. I climbed the stairs, each step more surreal than the last. The carpet was soft beneath my damp shoes, cushioning my rage. The door to our bedroom, my bedroom, was cracked open. I nudged it. Inside, the firelight danced on the walls. And there they were. Ronan, and a woman with her back to me, both naked under a quilt. My mother's quilt, the one she stitched by hand the winter after my father died. Ronan glanced over his shoulder. "You didn't text." That was all he said. The woman shifted under the blanket, not even bothering to cover herself more. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't cry. I stared at them. Ronan wouldn't meet my eyes. The woman, blonde, younger, smug, stared back like I was the intruder. And then I turned around and walked downstairs. My body moved on instinct. I returned to the living room, knelt beside my mother, and held her hand. Her skin was cold. Her eyes were closed. She stirred slightly. "Did you tell them I was waiting?" I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't answer. I just tucked the blanket tighter around her. That's when I noticed the bruises, small purple blooms along her wrist. the kind that came from being gripped too hard. I looked toward the front door, the lock. And it had definitely been changed. I remembered now. Ronan said it was for safety. He had even joked about how the old one stuck sometimes. I hadn't thought much of it then, just another homeowner fix. But now it looked like something else entirely. A quiet rage settled in my chest. This wasn't the first time she'd been locked out. She hadn't knocked too hard because she didn't expect to be let in. And I hadn't come home early because of a headache. My body knew something my mind hadn't wanted to face. I sat beside her in silence as the rain beat against the windows. The fire upstairs crackled on. No one came down. I could still smell that other woman's perfume in the air. They said Mom was just confused. But confused people don't lock themselves out in the rain, do they? The morning after I found my mother soaked and trembling on the front porch, the rain had stopped, but the storm inside me hadn't. I hadn't slept, not really. I lay awake on the couch most of the night, watching her chest rise and fall as she finally drifted into a restless sleep in the guest room. I kept wondering how many nights she'd spent out there before this one. Alone, cold, waiting for someone to notice. When the first hints of sunlight crept through the slats of the living room blinds, I forced myself up, made a pot of coffee, and stood barefoot on the kitchen tile, staring at the slow drip from the machine like it could somehow answer everything I couldn't say out loud. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that always came after something broke. I heard creaking above me, soft, deliberate footsteps, then the sound of the upstairs toilet flushing, a cabinet closing, running water. It was all too domestic, too normal, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't found my mother locked out of her own house while her son-in-law played house upstairs with another woman. The footsteps grew louder until they reached the top of the stairs. I turned toward the dining room, my body stiff with anticipation. Ronan appeared first, hair still wet from the shower, a clean t-shirt clinging to him like this was just any other Tuesday. No apology, no guilt, just his usual casual saunter into the kitchen. "Morning," he said, like we hadn't spoken last night, because technically we hadn't. I didn't respond. I just watched him pour himself a cup of the coffee I made. And then she appeared. At first, I couldn't quite place her. Blonde hair tied up loosely, oversized sweatshirt, too comfortable in my kitchen. But when she looked at me, smirk just barely visible, I knew. Leora Marsden. She had been my roommate in college for 2 semesters. She'd worked briefly as a consultant with Ronan's firm before things didn't work out, or so I'd been told. I hadn't seen her in over 3 years, and now here she was, barefoot, smiling, sipping from one of my mugs like she'd been living here all along. "Hey, stranger," she said. "Didn't know you'd be back so soon." My stomach turned. They both acted like I was the one who'd walked in uninvited, like I was the inconvenience, like I was just a bump in their morning routine. Leora sat down at the island and stirred some creamer into her cup, completely at ease. Ronan leaned against the counter, glancing at his phone, as if we were all waiting for someone to announce brunch. I leaned forward slightly. "You locked my mother out of the house." Ronan looked up. She was wandering again. "I figured she'd come back when she calmed down." "She wasn't wandering," I snapped. "She was shivering. She was soaked. She could have gotten sick." "She does that sometimes," Leora cut in. "She has good days and bad days. I didn't want to wake you." "I wasn't here," I said flatly. Leora blinked once, pretending to process that. "Right, I meant, we thought you'd told her something different." They were already rewriting the story, gaslighting me before breakfast. I watched the two of them like I was studying strangers on the street. Calculating, polished, not a crack in their armor. The kind of people who practice their lies in the mirror until they sounded like facts. "She's old, Aisling," Ronan said, sighing. "You can't expect her to be totally lucid all the time." "No," I replied, "but I expect her not to be locked outside in 40-degree rain while the two of you play house upstairs." He scoffed, muttering something about overreacting. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. Around noon, I sat on the back porch scrolling through my phone, trying to numb my thoughts with something brainless. That's when I saw the post. Ronan's sister had uploaded a carousel of photos, his birthday party, From 2 nights ago. The one I hadn't been told about. The one my mother hadn't been invited to. There they all were. His family, a few friends, even Leora, holding cake, clinking glasses, all of them grinning like the world was fine, like they had every right to celebrate without us. I swiped through each photo, my chest tightening. One picture showed Leora with her hand on Ronan's shoulder, her smile just a little too wide. The caption read, "So proud of the family we've built around Ronan. Not around me, not around us, around him." I dropped my phone on the table and stared out into the backyard. The garden beds I'd planted last spring were overrun with weeds. I hadn't noticed until just now. There had been a time I watered them every morning, trimmed the edges on Sundays, kept everything neat. That time was gone. That night, I helped Mom to bed. She didn't ask questions. She just held onto my arm as I guided her down the hallway. I tucked her in gently, smoothing the blanket over her shoulders. She grabbed my wrist, her fingers thin and trembling. "Don't leave me with them," she whispered. It wasn't fear in her voice. It was resignation, like she'd already given up. "I won't," I said, brushing a hand across her hair. "I promise." I closed her door quietly and stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the family photo on the wall. It had been taken 5 years ago, right after Ronan and I bought the house. We looked happy back then. I looked trusting, naive. I went to my room, pulled out my old laptop, and started opening files, bank accounts, utilities, mortgage documents. Ronan had been managing most of the finances for the past year, at my suggestion actually, when work got too hectic for me. I hadn't checked any of it since. I clicked through statements, found small transfers, $250 here, $100 there. Nothing huge, but enough to start a pattern. Then I saw her name, Leora, listed as a contractor for a consulting fee. Twice. They'd been planning this. Not just the affair, the takeover, of our home, of my mother's space, of everything I'd tried to protect. My jaw clenched. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. Tomorrow, I would be different. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, tucked into the edge of the hallway where the shadows hadn't quite given way to the lamplight. My bare feet pressed against the cool hardwood, and the hem of my pajama pants clung damp against my ankle. The house was silent, except for the clink of a spoon. From my vantage point, I could see the side of the kitchen. Leora stood by the counter, still in her robe. One of mine, I realized, a gift from my sister on my 40th birthday. She was humming softly, something low and tuneless, while stirring a cup. Her hand moved delicately, but not nervously. She wasn't worried about being caught. That told me everything. She slipped something from the pocket of her robe. I couldn't see what it was, not from where I stood, but I saw the way she pinched her fingers, the way she tilted the vial and tapped the contents into the tea. 1, 2, 3 drops. Then she gave it a quick stir, glanced once over her shoulder toward the hallway, and slid the cup onto a small tray alongside a napkin and 2 ginger biscuits. She walked out of the kitchen, tray in hand, toward the living room where my mother sat, bundled in a blanket, watching a game show with the volume turned low. The flicker of the TV lit up the edges of her face, casting deep shadows across her tired features. Her eyes stayed on the screen, unaware of what was about to be handed to her. Leora smiled, bright, sweet, unbothered, and set the tray down. "Here you go, Miss Delphine," she said in a sing-song voice, "just like you like it. Chamomile with a hint of honey." I stayed rooted in place, hidden, watching, memorizing. Once Leora walked away, humming again, I stepped into the room. Delphine looked up at me. Her face lit up, just a flicker, just enough to make me ache. "You're still up?" she asked. I nodded. "Can I sit with you?" She patted the couch. "Of course." I settled next to her, took the cup of tea without a word, and walked it right back to the kitchen. I poured the entire thing down the sink. Later that night, long after Mom had gone to bed, I sat on the floor of my bedroom, legs crossed, notebook in my lap. I wrote down everything I had seen, time, location, what Leora wore, how she moved, what she said. I wrote it all in black ink, double-lined for clarity. I wasn't going to wait anymore. The next morning started like any other. Birds outside, coffee brewing. The usual rustle of Ronan getting ready for his morning calls. Lyora was already dressed, chatting loudly on speakerphone in the sunroom, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had a tone she used when other people could hear her. Bright, friendly, performative. I ignored her. Instead, I sat with Mom. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us, a fresh cup of tea in front of her that I'd made myself. I used a sealed bag, straight from the tin, poured the water, added a bit of lemon. She was clearer today. Her eyes had less fog. Her hands didn't shake as much. We sat in silence for a while, just sipping. Then she said it, quiet, barely above a whisper. She told me, if I talk too much, they'll take the house. They'll say I'm not right, and you'll lose everything, baby. I didn't respond right away. My throat closed up, tight like a knot. I reached for her hand instead, held it between both of mine. She's not going to take anything, Mom. She looked at me. I could tell she wanted to believe me, but belief takes energy, and she was tired. That evening, while Lyora and Ronan were out, some excuse about a work dinner, I slipped into Mom's old bedroom. She hadn't used it in months. After a fall near the closet, I moved her downstairs where it was safer. The old room was now half storage, half forgotten. I went through the drawers. Nothing. Then I sat on the floor, leaned back, and my elbow nudged something. A creak beneath the bed frame. I moved the rug, pried up the floorboard. It came loose easier than I expected. Underneath was a small notebook. Faded blue cover, yellowed edges, a string wrapped around it like someone had tied it with shaky hands. Inside, the entries were short, some a few lines, others barely legible. But she had been writing. A lot. Every couple of days. They don't speak to me directly anymore. I heard them in the hall talking about the will. Ronan changed the locks, said it was safer this way. And then, repeated over and over near the end. They think I'm old and forgetful. But I remember everything. I held the book for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something settle, like a final puzzle piece snapping into place. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and opened Lyora's purse. She always left it on the dining chair. Sloppy, arrogant. Inside, I found what I was looking for. A small, clear bottle. No label, no prescription sticker. Just a plain plastic dropper. I didn't touch it. I just took a photo. Later, in Ronan's office, I found the cabinet locked. It hadn't been before. I tried a few of his usual passwords on the keypad. Birthdays, our old zip code. Nothing worked. But now I had something to add to my list. I wrote down the cabinet's brand, location, what I'd already tried. No more guessing. I was building a case. It wasn't just the tea, or the tone in her voice, or the drawer of mail with my mother's name opened and rifled through that made me snap. It was the words, the careless way they were spoken, like she wasn't in the room, like she hadn't raised me, like she wasn't still breathing in the very space they were trying to erase her from. 2 days had passed since I saw Lyora drop something into my mother's cup. I hadn't said a word about it. Not yet. I was watching, documenting, waiting for the kind of mistake you don't walk back from. That evening, just before 6, I stood in the kitchen, browning chicken thighs and chopping green beans. My mother sat at the breakfast nook behind me, humming a tune she half remembered from her youth. Her hands folded neatly on her lap, her eyes soft and far away. She seemed clearer that night, not sharp exactly, but settled. She kept glancing toward the hallway, like she expected someone to enter, and right on cue, Ronan's voice floated in from upstairs, followed by footsteps. A few seconds later, Lyora's laughter, thin, practiced, rehearsed. They came down together. Ronan had changed into a navy button-up I hadn't seen before. Lyora wore a red dress, something you'd wear to a rooftop dinner, not my kitchen table. She smelled like rose and vanilla, too sweet to be real. I set the table, made 4 plates, and pulled a chair out for Mom. As I placed the silverware, Lyora floated past and whispered under her breath. Wow, look at her go. You'd think the maid was trying to earn a tip. My hand froze above the fork. Mom hadn't heard it, or maybe she had and chose not to flinch. Ronan chuckled. She likes to keep busy. Lyora giggled. Well, she's got that shuffle just right. I stood there, hands still hovering over the silverware. I looked at Ronan, waiting for him to say something, anything, that might redeem him in this moment. But he just poured himself a glass of wine and offered one to Leora. I didn't speak. I finished setting the table and called everyone to dinner. We ate in relative silence. Mom barely touched her food. Leora and Ronan carried on with shallow small talk. Some article they read, a property opening in Bend, how tired they were from a day of calls. Afterward, I cleared the plates and walked Mom to her room. She paused by the hallway photo, the one of our family in front of Cannon Beach back when Dad was still alive. She used to smile every time she passed it. This time, she just stopped and looked down. "I'm used to being invisible," she said softly. I didn't respond. I just wrapped my arm around her shoulders and led her to bed. Later that night, after I heard their bedroom door click shut, I picked up Mom's cell phone from her nightstand. She rarely used it. I figured it had been powered off, or she didn't remember how to charge it, but the battery was full. The screen lit up with a wallpaper photo I had taken of us last year at the farmer's market. I opened the contacts. There were none. I checked the recent calls. Blank. I checked the text messages. All threads deleted. That was strange. Mom may not have used her phone often, but she wouldn't have erased every single contact. I went into the settings. That's when I saw it. Her call blocking list had over 20 numbers. My aunt, my cousin, my own name. All blocked. I unblocked them, one by one, hands trembling. Then I used my own phone to call her number. Call failed. I tried again. Still nothing. So I opened the system info. Her number had been replaced with a dummy number linked to a remote SIM. Whoever did it didn't just block people. They rerouted her phone, made sure any attempt to reach her would hit a wall. I sat down on the bed, gripping the phone. They had cut her off, completely, and she hadn't even known. I stood and walked to the window. The moon was high. The backyard was bathed in that pale, quiet glow only fall evenings get, just before the cold really sets in. I walked outside and crossed the yard to where Ronan and Leora sat on the garden bench, 2 wine glasses, their laughter soft but unmistakable. I didn't bother easing into it. "Her phone's been rerouted." Leora blinked. "What?" "Delphine's phone. No contacts, all the numbers blocked. Even mine. And it's not just blocked, it's been spoofed. You've been cutting her off from everyone she knows." Ronan shrugged. "That's ridiculous. She probably did it herself." "She's been confused for weeks. She didn't delete her entire contact list, and she sure as hell didn't reprogram her SIM card." He took a sip of wine. "You're being dramatic." I stared at them. "You locked her out of her house, you mocked her at dinner, and now you've shut her off from the world. You don't get to call me dramatic." Leora smiled, tight and sharp. "Why don't you calm down? You're starting to sound paranoid." I stepped closer. "Call her the maid again, Leora. Interfere with her phone one more time. Try anything else behind my back. And I swear to you, I won't be the one cleaning up the mess." Ronan stood. "Are you threatening us?" "No," I said, my voice level. "I'm promising." Neither of them replied. Leora looked away. Ronan's jaw clenched. I turned and walked back toward the house. They laughed when I warned them, but I had already started building the case. It was early afternoon, 2 days after I laid down my first clear warning. The leaves outside had started to turn, but the warmth still clung to the air like it wasn't ready to give up summer. I sat on the back porch with my second cup of coffee, the kind I made stronger than usual because thinking clearly now felt like a full-time job. My phone buzzed on the table next to me. I picked it up without much thought, assuming it was a reminder from the pharmacy or another one of those spammed political texts asking for donations. But it wasn't. It was Callie from nursing school. We hadn't spoken in over a year, maybe longer. The message was short. "Is that the Leora from college? Just saw her in some photos with your husband. Thought you knew?" There was an attachment underneath. A screenshot from someone's public post. Ronan's birthday bash, JPG. I opened it and froze. It was a party, big, well-dressed, full of smiling faces. In the center, Ronan stood with a drink in one hand and Leora tucked into his side, her hand on his chest. their bodies leaning into one another like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it wasn't deceit. The date on the photo, 2 years ago. 2 years. That wasn't new. That wasn't a fling. That was history, a long, well-guarded one. My coffee had gone cold. I put the phone down slowly, stood up, and walked back into the house. They had been planning this long before I even noticed the locks had changed. That evening, I told Ronan I'd be heading into the clinic early the next morning. It was a lie, of course, but he didn't ask questions. He barely looked up from his laptop. I woke early, dressed in jeans and a windbreaker, and quietly left the house just after 7:15. Instead of turning toward the clinic, I drove across town and parked 2 blocks away from his usual legal firm, the one he started visiting for insurance updates last month. I waited. At 8:02, Ronan's silver truck pulled into the lot. He stepped out, briefcase in hand, and adjusted his collar before walking through the glass doors like a man who had nothing to hide. I sat there, watched for 20 minutes, then took a few quick photos of the building, the signage, the parking lot with his truck, time-stamped, geotagged. When I got home later that day, I waited until Ronan left to pick up some supplies for the contractor. I went straight to the bedroom, opened his closet, and pulled down the gray lockbox he kept on the top shelf. The key was still taped under his watch drawer. He thought he was clever, but he was consistent. Inside was a folder labeled Delphine, Guardianship Transition. My heart dropped. The top page was a document prepared for the court. It stated that Delphine Halverson, my mother, had shown ongoing signs of mental decline and was a candidate for long-term assisted care. It listed Ronan as the suggested primary guardian. There was also a power of attorney form, already signed. Except it wasn't her signature. It was hers, but not really. Sloppy, uneven, and dated 3 weeks prior, when she'd been in bed for nearly 5 days with the flu and barely able to sit up straight. He'd forged it, or pressured her when she was too ill to argue. I pulled out my phone and took photos of every page. When he returned, I was already back downstairs pretending to read a magazine. I didn't mention anything. I didn't have to, not yet. But that night, after dinner, I heard him talking on the phone in the den. He didn't close the door all the way. I was in the kitchen, cleaning up, and his voice carried, "She'll be out of here by the end of the month. Once she's moved, we can liquidate fast. The daughter's emotional, but harmless." I turned the faucet off, every muscle in my jaw clenched. Harmless, that was the word he used for me. The next morning, I went through the rest of the financials, appraisal documents, realtor estimates. They had already scheduled an agent to tour the house under the pretense of a light renovation sale. They were going to move my mother to a facility she hadn't chosen, based on paperwork she hadn't signed, and sell the only home she had left, our home. And they were going to do it while smiling in my face, calling me dramatic, calling her the maid. Around 4 p.m., I found Leora outside in the garden. She was trimming the lavender bush, wearing gloves she'd never bought, humming a tune I was starting to hate. I didn't raise my voice. "You think you're smarter than me?" She looked up, blinked. "Excuse me? You think you're clever, slick, like you're the only one who knows how to keep a secret. But you're not older than me. You're not wiser, and you sure as hell aren't cleaner." She straightened her back slowly, set down the shears. "Aisling? No," I said. "Don't say my name like we're friends, like we ever were." She crossed her arms. "I don't know what you think you've figured out. I don't need to think. I know. I've seen the documents, the party, the signatures. I know everything you've touched, and whatever you're trying to take, you're going to have to fight for it, and I don't lose fights I care about." Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. I walked past her, through the side door, back into the house. The silence behind me said more than anything she could have offered in return. Ronan looked up from the dining table when I entered. "You okay?" he asked, acting casual, like nothing in our life was on fire. "I'm great," I said, setting my keys on the counter. "Just tying up loose ends." He didn't reply, but when I turned my back, I could feel him watching me, finally starting to wonder if maybe he'd underestimated the woman he thought was harmless. I warned them, but when you corner a predator, it doesn't retreat, it strikes. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line that evening, the air had shifted. It wasn't just the change in weather, it was in me. Something quiet but final had settled into place. I moved differently, thought faster. I was no longer reacting to what they did. I was calculating what I'd do next. After dinner, while Ronan and Leora watched TV in the living room and my mother rested quietly in the downstairs bedroom, I went upstairs to grab a blanket. The hallway light flickered once, cheap bulb, I noted, and as I reached the top, I caught a glimpse of the wall. Something was missing. I paused, turned slowly, and scanned the stretch of frames between the linen closet and the guest bathroom. A dozen photographs in matching wood frames, vacations, birthdays, wedding anniversaries, but one square of wall was now bare, the paint a shade lighter where the frame had hung for decades. My parents' wedding photo. Gone. I didn't panic. I walked slowly to the nearest drawer in the upstairs hallway table. It was the one we used for random keys, tape, batteries, menus from restaurants we never ordered from. I opened it gently. There it was. The frame was shoved toward the back, turned face down, a fine crack running along the corner of the glass. The photo inside was intact, but smudged. Dust clung to its surface like an accusation. I pulled it out and stared at it. My father in his navy suit, my mother in a simple lace dress, both smiling with the kind of joy people don't fake. This wasn't decor. This was memory. From behind me, Leora's voice floated in like perfume gone sour. It didn't go with the new aesthetic. I didn't turn around. You're redecorating now? She stepped beside me, arms crossed, her tone annoyingly casual. Well, you've been so distant. I figured someone needed to start updating the vibe. I looked at her, not with anger, but with something colder. The vibe? She smiled, unfazed. You know what I mean. I walked past her, taking the photo with me. No words left to waste. Downstairs, I returned the photo to the cabinet in my mother's room. I placed it upright on the dresser, wiped the glass clean, and turned off the light as she slept. Around 10, I went outside to take out the recycling. The porch light buzzed softly above me. As I neared the back of the house, I heard her, Leora. Her voice filtered out from the patio, soft and sharp all at once. I stopped just before the corner, the shadows of the trees giving me cover. She's clinging to her mom like it's going to change anything, Leora said into her phone, the irritation in her voice barely masked. Once we get the house, we're done. Ronan doesn't even like her voice. I can't listen to her sigh through another sentence. I didn't move. I just listened. She laughed softly, like she was sharing some private joke with the person on the other end. I mean, how much longer do we have to pretend? The old lady's halfway to memory care, and the daughter's hanging on by guilt. Once they're out, we're in. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and hit record. She kept talking. She acts like she's watching, like she knows something, but she's soft, emotional. Ronan says she's harmless. That word again. Harmless. When I stepped back into the house, I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. Upstairs, I went to my bedroom, turned on the lamp, and opened the folder I'd been slowly filling for the past week. Inside were scanned pages of my mother's journal, voice memos I'd recorded, screenshots, and now, audio. I copied the recording to a USB drive. Then I opened my laptop and drafted a legal document, a notice of intent to challenge guardianship. I included every relevant file, timeline, audio transcript, journal entry excerpts. When I finished, I printed 3 copies. One went into my personal safe. One I delivered to my attorney the next morning. The third, that went on Ronan's desk. I placed it directly beside his keyboard. I made sure the words fraudulent transfer, coercion, and elder abuse were bolded in black ink. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I changed the lock on my mother's bedroom door. A second bolt, silent, sleek, installed before breakfast. I kept the only key. That afternoon, Ronan stormed in as I folded laundry in the den. "What the hell is this?" he said, waving the document like a flag. I kept folding. "Looks like paperwork." "You don't get to lock doors in this house." I turned to him, calm as ever. "It's not your house anymore. It's a crime scene, and I've just secured the evidence." He stared at me, jaw tight. "You think this is going to end well for you?" I think, I said, stepping toward him slowly, that the last thing you expected was for me to stop being quiet. He didn't speak. Behind him, Leora appeared in the hallway, eyes wide but mouth closed. She saw the shift. She saw that I wasn't asking questions anymore. I was giving answers. I walked past both of them, grabbed my coat, and left the house. I didn't need to scream. I had the truth, and I was about to unleash it. The morning after I left that file on Ronan's desk, the air inside our house felt different. Still thick, still dishonest, but disturbed, like dust after a long-ignored shelf gets slammed shut. Neither of them said a word to me at breakfast. Leora avoided eye contact. Ronan scrolled his phone with the intensity of someone pretending to read. Delphine sat quietly, sipping the tea I made myself. No drops, no poison, just lemon and honey. When she reached for my hand, I squeezed it lightly. She didn't speak, but the pressure of her fingers told me she felt the shift too. Later that day, when they left for what Ronan described as back-to-back meetings, I took my chance. I didn't waste time. I went straight into his home office and stared at the cabinet I hadn't cracked yet, the one with the keypad lock he thought was discreet. I'd already tried his usual go-to combinations, and none of them worked. But as I stood there now, staring at the brushed metal numbers, something clicked in my mind. His mother's birthday. I punched it in. The lock beeped twice, and then popped. Inside, I found two thick envelopes, one labeled Property Transfer, the other marked Family Affairs, Confidential. I opened the first one. There it was. The deed to the house. Transferred 4 months ago from Delphine's name to Ronan's. On paper, everything looked official. Neat signatures, date stamps, notarized seals. But then I looked closer. Delphine's signature was wrong. Not just sloppy, wrong. The loop of the H was too wide. The E curled too much. I had watched my mother sign her name 100 times growing up. This was not her handwriting. And the date? It fell smack in the middle of the week she was in the hospital with pneumonia, barely coherent, barely conscious. This wasn't just sneaky, this was criminal. I snapped photos of every page with my phone, each one time-stamped, backed up, and uploaded to cloud storage I'd set up under a false name. Just as I was about to close the folder, the doorbell rang. I jumped. It was mid-afternoon. Mail had already come. No one we knew ever just dropped by anymore. Not without calling first. I peeked through the window. No one. I opened the door slowly. A large brown envelope sat on the mat. No return address. Just my name. Handwritten. I took it inside, closed the door, and locked it. Then I sat at the kitchen table and pulled the tab. Inside, I found a flash drive. A short note. You don't know me, but I worked with Ronan before he made me disappear. I saved what I could. If you're smart, you'll use it. K. Kier. I remembered the name. Briefly, in some work conversation years ago. Someone Ronan fired for incompetence, he'd claimed. I plugged the drive into my laptop. First, audio. A clear recording. No static, no glitch. Ronan and Leora talking in what sounded like our backyard. You said she'd be out already. She will be. The transfer's done. I've got the appraisal lined up. We can list it before Thanksgiving. And her daughter? She won't fight. She's attached to the house, not the woman. All I have to do is play the guilt card. She folds every time. My stomach churned. Another file, a screenshot. Leora's phone messages. Once she's gone, we'll Airbnb it for a while. Ronan wants to install a hot tub. I clicked through photos. One showed Leora at a pharmacy counter, picking up pills with a prescription that clearly wasn't in her name. Another, a close-up of her hand pouring drops into a teacup. My hands didn't shake. I downloaded everything. That night, after the house had quieted and everyone pretended to sleep, I went to the den and opened the binder I'd prepared. Audio transcripts, printed screenshots, entries from Delphine's journal, photocopies of her original signature compared to the forgery, voicemail recordings, including one from 2 months ago where Delphine whispered, "They don't like when I talk too much." I added the new evidence. Every piece fit now, like a horrible puzzle finally locking into place. The next morning, I drove to the legal aid office in town. No dramatic music, no heavy breathing, just a calm, calculated visit. I carried my binder like a woman carrying her own spine. I met with an attorney named Grace Ellis, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and the expression of someone who's seen just enough darkness to know when someone is telling the truth. She listened, carefully. No interruptions. She asked sharp questions, took detailed notes. She highlighted specific phrases in the documents and quietly said, "This isn't just civil, this is criminal." By the time I left, formal charges had been initiated. Elder abuse, financial fraud, medical neglect, illegal property transfer. Grace assured me that protective actions would be filed by the following morning. Back home, I didn't rush. I made dinner for Delphine. I sat with her at the table. I made her laugh, just a little, just enough to remind me that parts of her were still inside. Later, as we sat quietly in the living room, the fireplace crackling, I handed her the photo that Leora had removed. Our family photo, the one from the beach. She held it in her lap for a long time, brushing her thumb along the glass. "They'll never understand what it's like to raise something and have it stolen," she said. I didn't answer right away. Then I looked at her, squarely, steadily. "But we're taking it back." She nodded, still staring at the picture, and we sat like that, just the two of us. No more pretending, no more lies. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just walk into court. I'd walk in with the truth and dare them to lie. We arrived just after 9 a.m. The courthouse sat square and heavy against a gray sky, its brick walls dulled by decades of Oregon rain. I parked in the lot 2 rows away from Ronan's truck, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Close enough for him to see us walk in, far enough that we wouldn't have to cross paths. Delphine sat quietly beside me, her hands folded in her lap, a scarf tucked around her neck even though the car heater had been on the entire ride. She hadn't said much that morning, but when I reached over and touched her fingers, she squeezed back. That was all I needed. Inside, the court clerk gave me a curt nod and directed us to the assigned room. We waited in the hallway for 15 minutes, maybe 20. When the bailiff opened the door and called our names, my mother stood slowly, leaned slightly into my arm, and walked beside me through the threshold. Ronan and Leora were already seated, side by side at the defendant's table. Matching navy tones, matching expressions of false calm. They didn't look at us, not directly. But I saw Leora whisper something to Ronan as we walked past. I took a seat beside my attorney, Grace Ellis. She gave me a quiet, encouraging look as she pulled the binder from her briefcase and adjusted her glasses. And then we began. The judge, Honorable Helen McCaffrey, was a composed woman in her early 60s, white hair pulled back tightly, no nonsense in her voice when she called the session to order. Her eyes scanned the docket quickly, her tone clear and clipped. This hearing regards the petition to revoke guardianship assignment, property reassignment under questionable signature, and an emergency request for protective action involving Miss Sabai. Delphine Halverson. She looked up, directly at Ronan. "Let's proceed." Grace stood first, calm, direct, no theatrics. She opened with a timeline, dates of the hospital visit, the notarized property transfer, the exact dates that Delphine was under sedation. She slid forward a copy of the journal entry from that week. Then she moved on to the signature comparison, originals from Delphine's driver's license, medical intake forms, and the supposed deed signature that looked like a 4th grader trying to copy a parent's handwriting. Then came the audio. Ronan flinched when the first recording played, his voice clear as day. "She'll be out of here by the end of the month. Once she's moved, we can liquidate fast. The daughter's emotional, but harmless." Leora shifted in her seat. Her eyes darted around the room, but nowhere near me. Grace let the silence settle before continuing. She moved to the surveillance footage, screenshots of Leora at the pharmacy, receipts from medications that didn't match any prescribed to Delphine. Then came the voicemail, Delphine whispering into the receiver weeks ago. "They told me not to talk. They said I'd lose everything." When it was Ronan's attorney's turn, he stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and tried to control the tremble in his hands. "Your Honor," he began, "we believe Ms. Halverson has been unduly influenced by her daughter, who has a known history of anxiety and emotional instability." Grace stood immediately. "Objection. No medical documentation submitted suggests such a history, and I'd request that personal character attacks be excluded. The judge raised a hand. Sustained. Stick to the evidence, counselor. Ronan's attorney shifted strategies. He argued that Delphine had willingly signed the papers, that she'd been of sound mind, that the transfer was discussed at length and witnessed appropriately. Judge McCaffrey turned to Ronan. Mr. Coyle, can you explain why a woman you now claim is senile was entrusted with full property ownership only months prior to your request for guardianship? Ronan blinked. Well, at the time, we believed she was stable, but since then— So, the judge interrupted, she was competent enough to sign over her entire estate, but not competent enough to revoke it? He didn't answer. Then the screen came on behind the witness stand. Keir's face filled the frame. He sat in a modest home office, button-down shirt, slightly nervous smile. Grace introduced him briefly. Mr. Keir was an accountant employed by Mr. Coyle. He was terminated shortly after refusing to falsify the documentation regarding this estate. The judge turned to the screen. Mr. Keir, please confirm. Keir cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. I was asked to create a secondary ledger showing expenses under Delphine Halverson's name. These expenses did not exist. I refused. And I was let go within 48 hours. I sent copies of everything I kept to the daughter once I realized she was being isolated. It was quiet after that. Even Ronan's attorney didn't speak. The judge looked down, scribbled a few notes, and finally exhaled. In light of the evidence presented, she said, I am ordering the immediate reversal of the property transfer. The house remains under Miss Halverson's name, with sole guardianship rights held by her and, if necessary, co-managed by Miss Aisling Halverson. She looked up. A protective order will be issued effective immediately. Mr. Coyle and Mrs. Marsden are to vacate the property within 72 hours. Divorce proceedings will be scheduled separately. All financial assets are frozen pending further investigation into fraud, coercion, and elder abuse. Leora started to cry, silent at first, then gasping like something inside her had finally cracked. Ronan didn't move, didn't blink. He sat there stunned, as if someone had cut the power to everything he built. Delphine reached for my hand again. I held it tight. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, though we had requested no press coverage. Still, someone had tipped them off. We kept our heads down, walking past them like ghosts. In the car, Mom leaned back, eyes closed. You okay? I asked. She nodded slowly. I feel like I just got my name back. I reached for her hand again. It was always yours. That evening, as I stood in the kitchen cooking dinner, the house felt different. Still, yes, but clean. Like the air had been cleared for the first time in years. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt honest. The courtroom emptied, but the silence in my heart hadn't. 3 months had passed since the courtroom emptied. The rain had long stopped. So had the questions from neighbors. The energy around our house, the tension that had once clung to the walls like mildew, had finally lifted. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, like spring thawing out the coldest corners of winter. Some days, I'd walk from room to room and not feel the need to brace myself for a voice I didn't trust coming from the other side of a door. That morning, I stood in the backyard garden with a hose in my hand, watching water fall in soft arcs over the soil. The lavender had started coming back, even after Leora's aggressive pruning. The tomatoes were stubborn, but surviving. And Delphine sat under the awning nearby, wrapped in her knit shawl, eyes following the birds that hopped along the fence. She'd become more herself again. Not entirely. Some days were still foggy for her. But they weren't the kind of fog that left her helpless. They were the kind of slow mornings we all feel after too much has happened in too little time. I turned off the hose and walked toward her. She didn't speak, just reached out and took my hand. The coffee pot inside gurgled. The breeze carried the scent of lilacs from the side yard. The world didn't feel perfect, but it felt still. And that was something. We didn't talk much anymore about what happened. Not because we couldn't, but because we didn't need to. The silence wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that existed between people who understood pain and were choosing peace. "We don't laugh like we used to," I said, gently breaking the quiet. Delphine looked up at me. "No," she said. "But we're not afraid anymore. That counts for something." We sat like that for a while, just breathing, just present. Later that evening, while folding towels, I came across one of the soft green bath mats we used to keep upstairs. It brought a memory back I hadn't allowed myself to fully remember. The fall. It had been a Sunday night, close to midnight. I'd heard a thud from the bathroom but didn't move fast enough. When I found her, she was sitting on the floor, clutching the sink base with one hand, her shoulder bruised and her elbow bleeding. Laura had said, "She must have been moving too fast." Ronan had added, "She does that sometimes, wanders around when she shouldn't." I had nodded, helped clean her up, but didn't push. I didn't ask how long she'd been lying there before someone came. I didn't ask why she wasn't given the call button we'd talked about. I didn't ask why the blood was dry around the edges. That night, as I laid the folded towels into the linen closet, she appeared in the hallway, leaning slightly against the wall. "I knew you didn't want to see it then," she said softly. I paused, turned toward her. "But I also knew you'd come around." I walked over and wrapped my arms around her. Not as a daughter making things right, just as a woman grateful that not every failure is final. A few days later, an envelope came in the mail, thicker than usual, marked from the county clerk's office. Inside, final notice of case closure, protective order extended indefinitely, full title deed reinstated, civil suits pending against Ronan from 2 separate elder families in the Portland area. Laura had relocated to Nevada. Her transformational coaching business had failed within 6 weeks. I tucked the letter into the file drawer in the laundry room and didn't say a word to Mom. No need. Justice had already done its job. Quietly. Completely. That weekend, we rearranged the living room furniture. Nothing dramatic. Just moved the couch to face the garden view and added a few potted plants. Mom picked out a new curtain rod, brushed nickel. I let her decide everything. We put up new photos, a few old ones I had kept in a shoebox, a few we took just that week, her smiling on the porch with her tea, me in the kitchen in my apron, both of us standing under the blooming dogwood tree. There wasn't much laughter that day, but there was one moment, over burnt cookies, when we both doubled over, not because it was that funny, but because it felt that good to laugh again, the kind that comes from knowing the worst part is behind you. That night, I read aloud to her from one of her favorite books. She fell asleep in the chair beside me. I didn't wake her. I just sat there a little longer, letting the moment be what it was. "It's just us now," I whispered quietly, brushing hair from her forehead. "But it's enough. There was no next chapter for them, but for us, there's still time." Sometimes, the people who smile at you across the dinner table are the same ones quietly erasing you from your own life. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about reclaiming your voice when everyone has tried to silence it. It's about protecting the ones who once protected us, even when doing so means standing alone. Have you ever trusted someone, only to find out they were building your downfall behind your back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true family stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters most.